morning.
Nope.
Is that better? Hello? I don't really need this, but is this any better? Oh, there we go. Well, good morning. Thank you for coming to the church at Estrella this morning. We're really excited to have you here today. It's a really exciting Sunday, as most of you know. Huge sporting event today. I'm sure you're all dying to get home and watch it. The People's Championship, the Waste Management Open Final, right? No? Is that just me? All right. No, seriously, that is on today, and I will be watching that. But the Super Bowl is today. It's going to be an exciting Sunday. The Chiefs against Brady Jr. So we'll see how this all actually works out. Obviously, I'm going for the Chiefs because that's why I said that. But whoever you're going for today, best of luck to you. We'll jump straight into the announcements that way. There are Super Bowl community parties or community groups going on today. If you're a part of those, you're going to have a great time. If you're not and you would like to be a part of them, please see one of us. I'm sure we would all love to have you at those. It's a great way to meet other people in the church and just watch the game with like-minded people. So please, if you're interested, let us know, and we can make sure that you get to the right party or a party. Next week, 2 weeks from now, on February 16th, we will be doing the Lord's Supper communion right after church. So please, if you're interested in that, we would love to have you come and be a part of that. It's a great time to really celebrate Christ and the things that He's done for us and what He'll do for us in the future. Later on that evening, there is dessert with the pastor from 5:30 to 7:30. I know that people have already started signing up, so please, if you're interested in being a part of that, sign up. Oh, I'm like, you're like creeping on me, like, what did I do wrong? So please sign up for that. Great way, you can ask him any kind of questions, whether personal or anything about Christ. It's just a great time to get to know him more and for him to get to know you a little bit more as well. A week after that, from 5:30 to 7:30 again, we're having a membership class. If you're interested in becoming a member, if you're not even sure what being a member of a church looks like or why even need to be a member of a church, it's a great way, one, to get information for taking that step and moving in that direction, or if you've already thought about it between you and your family and you're interested in that, please sign up for the membership class. We can get with somebody. I think you can do it on the app. So definitely check that out. On March 7th, the ladies will have a ladies brunch, and that will be at Mimi's Cafe off of Dicer. It is at 9:30 to 11:30. So again, if you're interested, make sure you see somebody, either Miss Stephanie or Lorraine or Miss Emily or Aaron or anybody. I think can probably get you the information that you need. It'll be on the table back there. And yesterday we had our first ever women's conference called Rooted. It was 47 ladies came and participated in this. It was right here.
And 3 guys.
And 3 guys. So, and don't worry, I mean, they were more like technical support, but it was a huge smashing success. The Lord really worked in some incredible ways. I've seen pictures and a little bit of video from it. It was outstanding. Courtney sang 11 songs. And Ryan, I know, I was getting there. Ryan was there too. He was part of the technical support. But a huge success, and this brunch will be the first March event going on.
First Saturday of March.
Let's see. Yeah.
Yeah.
1st March? Yes. All right, whatever. Technicalities. So please, if you're interested in that, definitely sign up. And along with that, there is a book that I think the ladies are studying from for the ladies group. If you were interested in reading about that or want more information, the back table, they can give you all of that. So that's all the announcements that I have for today. If you can, do me a favor, stand up. Go across the aisle, say hello to somebody, put your arm around them. Again, not your family, not your the person you invited, but say hello, put your arm around them, and ask if there's an opportunity to pray for them. Okay, great. Thank you so much. You can return to your seats, but stay standing because we are going to enjoy some God-honoring worship.
You are my portion. children. We love you, God. Who might at the highest king would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who in all the moments of our lives. He says that you are connected by me, or to me, by love. They're bonds that can never be severed. However, you may sometimes feel alone because your union with me is invisible. So if you can't see it, sometimes it's just hard to remember that it's there, right? Ask me to open your eyes so that you can find me everywhere. The more aware you are of my presence, the safer you feel. I am far more real than the world you can see, hear, and touch. Faith. That's what faith is. It's the confirmation of things we don't see and the conviction of their reality, perceiving as real fact what is not revealed to the senses. So we have faith in him. Over the weekend, my son asked me, he said, "Mommy, did God die?" And as a mom, I was like, wait, like, how do I explain this, right? Like, I was like, well, Jesus did, but that didn't really answer the question. So I said to him, Noah, faith is believing in things that aren't there, right? So God didn't die. He's forever alive. But you just can't see him. But he's there. And that's just what faith is. And in that moment, it just made me think, you know what? I'm so thankful for our little innocent minds of our children, just asking those questions that make us think. Because we have a great God. And I'm so thankful for him and all he's done for us. Let's just think about that and sing about how great our God is. The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, darkness tries to hide and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Age to age he stands. Time is in his hands. Beginning and the end. Beginning and the end. The Godhead, three in one. Father, Spirit, Son. The Lion and the Lamb. Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Name above all names, you are worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. Name above all names. Name above all names. You are worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great
Is your life limited by the labels the world and other people have used to define you? Labels you have internalized and apply to yourself every day. Labels like afraid, or addict, orphan, damaged goods, failure, maybe even religious. These labels might be sewn into your life with such tight little stitches that they feel like a part of you. They feel like they define you. That's a lie. If you let him, Jesus can remove those old labels and tattoo new ones onto your soul. Then you'll begin to see yourself as God the Father sees you. The limits will be lifted. Your life will be transformed. A limitless life.
Well, welcome back. How you guys doing today? Good, good. Well, I'm glad you could be here for week 2 of our series called Limitless Life. Now, last week, maybe you were here, maybe you weren't, but last week we learned something about ourselves. Now, to be honest, some of you may have already known this about yourselves. Others of you, you were like, this was revolutionary, right? But last week we learned that we are namers by nature. That we are namers by nature. In other words, we have a name for everything. In fact, what we saw last week was that Adam, the very first man, right, he was given a job by God to name and label everything. And he did exactly that. In fact, God not only asked him to do the job, he gave him the tools to be able to do the job. And those same tools that were inside of Adam are inside of you and are inside of me. And so by nature, by the way that we were designed, the way that we were created, we are namers. We take things and we pick up labels, right? We not only assign them to other things, right? We not only put labels on other stuff, but when we see them, right, we tend to pick them up and apply those labels to ourselves. And last week we talked about lots of different labels that we add on to our own lives. At the end of it, what we saw though is that many of these labels that we add into our own lives, really, they're not labels that just name us, they're labels that define us, they're labels that limit us on what we're capable of doing. Because of whatever it is that's written on the label. Last week we talked about the whole reason that Jesus came was not to cover up those labels. Not even to rip them off of us, but he was so disgusted with the labels that we were wearing on our lives that instead he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you something brand new. And then I'm going to stick a label on you that says that you are mine and that you are new. That's an incredibly powerful message. To hear from Jesus that he doesn't see those labels that we so constantly pick up all over the place, whether they were something that we defined ourselves with or whether it was something that somebody else gave to us. He says, I came so that you could be new. Today we're going to continue to build on that idea from last week. We're going to take that idea of being a new creation and the labels that God wants to have in our lives and to say, what does it look like if we are new? What should we do now? So over the next few weeks, here's what we're going to do. We're going to be looking at some stories from the Old Testament. Some people that lived even before Jesus came that give us a glimpse of what I think it would look like for us to surpass these sort of limits in our lives. So if you have your Bibles, open them up to Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22. As you're flipping there, there's something I would like to acknowledge about this series. You're like, week 2, and now you're going to tell us something about the series? Yeah, week 2, I'm going to tell you something about the series. And that is that this series has a unique set of challenges about it. And every series has some different challenges that come with it. Most of them are in my own sinful life, and I have to deal with everything that I'm about to tell you. And God's like, hey, I'm going to work on you first. But this one has a different set of unique challenges to it, because I believe that there are a couple different ways to teach the Bible. All right? Some of you, if you've been around for a little while, you've heard me say this, so it might be a good recap for you. If you're newer in our room, or maybe today's the first time, hey, you're here on a great day, because I'm going to tell you one of the things that we believe when it comes to teaching the Bible. You see, there's three different ideas about how you should teach the Bible. There's this idea of what's called expository teaching. Now, you've probably not heard that big word, but simply expository means to go verse by verse, or to look at everything that is contained within a specific passage and to begin to pull it all apart. And there are some churches that you'll walk into and they'll tell you, this is the only way that you should study the Bible. Somebody who doesn't study the Bible like this, they're just picking and choosing what it is that they want. And there's some truth to what it is that they're saying. There is some good things about expository teaching. But here's what I believe is that it is a good method in order to use to look at what Scripture is teaching and for teaching to come that way. There's a second idea, though, about teaching, and that is what's called topical teaching. And topical teaching is this idea of you look at a topic. For example, love. It's the month of February. It's a good topic, right? And so some churches will say, here's what we're going to do, is we're going to take a topic like love, and we're going to look at all of the different passages that exist in the Bible from start to finish about this idea, this topic. And so they'll build a series of teaching that's around a topic, and then they'll begin to look for some things that support that and give you an entire biblical perspective on that topic. I think you can already see there are some benefits that come with that, right? When you're verse by verse, you don't necessarily deal with a topic that's there, and you don't get to see the breadth of everything that exists inside of that. And so topical has this built-in strength of, I get to see the whole biblical perspective of something. But I think you also see there's a weakness that comes with that one, right? And the weakness is that you can pick and choose what topics you're going to talk about. You can pick and choose what passages you're going to use when you're talking about that topic. So it has some inherent dangers within it. But there's a third way that you can teach it. It's called narrative. Now, narrative simply means the story, right? And it means to take the stories of the Bible and attempt to bring them to life, to help the people to understand that those stories are about real people and real situations, and that they have a real application to your life. Now, personally, I think all three of these things have strengths and weaknesses. I think all three of them, there are certain people that will relate better with each of them. And so we decided early on, as a part of the teaching ministry of this church, as the preaching ministry of this church, that what we would do is intentionally walk through all three types of teaching. So there are series that when you walk into our room are incredibly exegetical. We'll be in a certain passage and tearing it apart, verse by verse. And the very next series you can come back and it will be topical. And we're going to be looking at the breadth and the width and the depth of whatever this idea and this topic is so that we can hit all of the different areas of it. And then there's this series, a narrative series. And I have to be honest, of all three of those, I think narrative is the hardest for me to teach. I love that the lights are going down. It's like bringing some dramatic emphasis on what we're doing here. But to be honest, I think narrative is the hardest of the three for me to do. There are some guys who are incredibly skilled at narrative, and they can tell you a story and weave in the application, and people are just sitting on the edge of their chairs. And you would think, as a kids pastor who spent 15 years telling the stories of the Bible, this is the one that I would be really, really good at. And maybe it's my own insecurities. Because when I look at these stories of the Bible, I think about those years spent in kids ministry, and I'm like, hey, I don't want them to see me as a kids pastor. I want to be an adult pastor right now. And so as we come at this narrative stuff, I just want to lay out some of my fears as we come into it, but that I think that it is important to hear these stories, these real stories of real people that are in the Bible and about the real things that happen in their lives and the real applications that we can make because of it and why they're there. So, with all of that, let's dive into this incredibly rich story of this person who was following God, and because of that, he made an impact on not history, but his story. I always love that. Whenever I see that meme that says history is just really his story. So our story comes from Genesis chapter 22. By the way, let me tell you one of the other things that's hard about narrative is that usually narratives are big, long chunks in the Bible, right? And they're really hard for me to zero in and say, hey, open up your Bible to this one verse and let's look at this together. So I'm going to help you a little bit, but I'm just going to tell you the story and where it comes from. Our story comes from Genesis chapter 2, and it's about a man named Abraham. Not Abraham Lincoln, right? This guy was long before that point. In fact, most scholars think that he was somewhere about 4,000 years ago from right now. Abraham, the story opens up in chapter 22, and it tells us that after these things. So in other words, the author that's there that's writing says, hey, I want you to know that there are things that have happened in Abraham's life. And this story takes place after those things. Let me tell you some of those things that had happened in his life. Abraham had left his home country. He left where his family was and where everything he was in order to follow God. That's crazy. I mean, I might know somebody who's done that, but that's still crazy. And then, after he did that, you're like, oh my goodness, that takes a lot of faith for a guy like that to do that. Then he gets into a situation where he gets a little bit nervous, and he tells his wife, he says, listen, I'm worried that these people are going to think that you're beautiful, and that they're going to want to kill me if they find out that I'm married to you, so would you not tell them that we're married? What? You just left your home country because God told you to. You get somewhere and you're worried that they're going to kill you because of it, and so you tell your wife to lie? Okay, fine. I guess. Doesn't work out so well. They get run out of town. They figure it out. Then God comes to, at the time his name was Abram, right? And God makes a promise to him. He says, Abram, I want to turn you into a great nation. In fact, I want to change your name right here from Abram to Abraham, from an exalted father to the father of a great multitude. And he says, here's what I want. Abraham, could you number the stars? Could you count them all in the sky? Because whatever you count up there is how many I'm going to make your nation into one day. He's like, I'm going to make you great. And the reason that I'm going to do it is because the governing of self that you guys have been doing isn't working. And this whole divine kingdom that I have been wanting to set up since Eden has been failing. So I'm going to do something totally different. I'm going to do it through you. And I'm going to set up a divine nation that's ruled by me, God. And if you'll follow me, I'm going to do something crazy. Abraham said, okay. His name went from Abram to Abraham. But Abraham at the time had 0 kids. By the way, when he left his homeland, he was 75. When he got to this point, he was 99. I don't know about you, but at 99, I'm not expecting to have any more kids. Thank you, Austin. I appreciate that. Newest kid in the room over there. That's what's going on. So, Abram gets this promise from God, and he's like, well, all right, God said it. I believe it. And so Abraham and Sarah go back and they have this conversation. She's like, okay, I guess if God's going to do it, we'll do it. And they wait a little bit and nothing happens. And so Sarah says, you know what, Abraham? Why don't you take my servant over here. Her name's Hagar. She's beautiful, right? Why don't you have relations with her and we'll get an heir that way? Because maybe I'm just not supposed to do it. Maybe I'm not supposed to be part of it. Maybe I'm still tainted from all of this stuff earlier where I lied for you and I wasn't supposed to and I knew the right thing to do, but I didn't do it anyways. Maybe God's punishing me, so would you do this? Abraham says, sure. So Hagar gets pregnant, has a boy, his name's Ishmael, right? And then right after that, Sarah gets pregnant. And Isaac comes. They named him Isaac because it means laughter. And they laughed the fact that God had said that he was going to do all of this through him. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, Sarah's there. She's got her baby. Over here is Hagar with her child. A little competition starts to show up. And Abraham has to choose what's he going to do. So he runs Hagar out of town. Child, no. And it's after these things, that's a lot of things. After these things that God shows up in order to test Abraham about what it meant to be the father of a nation. About if he believed the promises that God had given to him. So God and Abraham have a conversation, and Abraham responds and says, God, I'm here, and I'll do whatever you want me to do. And after their conversation, the very next morning, Abraham gets up. In fact, it says he gets up early in the morning. Now, I don't know who gets up early in the morning. Right? Ryan's over there yawning already. He's like 10:30 is early in the morning. I got you, Ryan. He gets up early in the morning, and Abraham and Isaac, and he takes 2 male servants with him, and they take off for a 3-day journey to go to Mount Moriah in order to worship God on the mountain and to offer a sacrifice to him. So they load up and they begin this 3-day journey. And they get all the way to the foot of the mountain. And Abraham looks at the 2 servants that are with him, and he says to the servants, he says, hey, you guys stay here. The boy and I, we're going to go up there. We're going to go worship. And then we're going to come back. The servants are like, okay. And so he and the boy, he says, what are we sacrificing? And Abraham says, God will provide. God will provide what we're going to sacrifice. Isaac says, okay. Then Abraham walks over and he begins to tie ropes around Isaac. Ties his feet, ties his hands, and he lays Isaac on the altar. Because 3 days ago, God and Abraham had talked, and God said, here's what I want you to do, Abraham. I want you to take Isaac, your only son, Isaac, the one whom you love, the one who everything about your promise is wrapped up into, and I want you to sacrifice him. And here's Abraham. Here's Isaac. Knife in the air. Ready to sacrifice his son. As he gets ready to bring down the knife, an angel of the Lord stops him. And he looks over, and in the bushes over there is a ram that's tangled up. And I can just imagine that with tears streaming down his face, Abraham is like, there's the sacrifice. Let's go get it. And he and Isaac return home. Now, some of you right now are like, wait, what just happened? You're telling me he put his son on an altar in order to sacrifice it to God because God asked him to do that? What? Before we dive into the story, though, I want to take a moment. I want to take a moment for us to pray. And normally, I say kind of like what we would call like a pastoral prayer, like I pray for all of us in the room. But today, what I want you to do is I want you to spend a moment in prayer before we continue on. And here's what I want to encourage you to pray about as we get ready to wrestle with this passage and what it means. I want you to pray, God, would you open up my heart in such a way to hear from you about what we're going to talk about today? God, would you challenge me in a way that that maybe I've never been challenged before. Let's pray. God, we're about to talk about a huge concept. Faith. And God, I know I don't have anything like what Abraham had. And I seriously doubt many of us in this room do. And God, when I read this passage, when I look at what it says, I don't even know that I begin to even understand it. So God, I'm praying in my own heart. I'm praying for understanding. I'm praying for wisdom. I'm praying for discernment. I'm praying to apply the things that we're going to talk about in my own life. God, would you help set us on a course, on a path of faith? Not a limited faith, not a non-existent faith, but God, something that looks limitless like what Abraham had. Pray that in your name. Amen. Faith. That's a loaded religious word, right? Faith. It gets thrown around in a lot of places with a lot of things. So how could Abraham do this? So he says, in faith. In faith. Yeah. How come he didn't ask any questions? Faith. In faith. How come he didn't argue with God about that? I would have so many questions about that. Me too. Me too. And to be honest, so many people have been so cavalier with this idea and this word of faith that maybe perhaps you've doubted if you even have any of this. In fact, maybe some of you are sitting in the room, and if you were honest about it, this word faith and how somebody used it at some point in time caused you to stumble and maybe even walk out of the church. Maybe it's your first time back in the church because of this word faith. You just struggled with it. You're like, I don't know what it means to have faith. Maybe you're sitting here right now and you're like, this is my last chance. My hand is on the doorknob right now to walk out of the church because of this idea of faith, and you're just barely hanging on. Maybe this is you, or maybe this is someone that you know, but here's the perception. The perception about faith is that Christianity, or being a Jesus follower, requires some sort of mind-numbing, experience-denying faith. That faith is this sort of head in the sand, because if you look too close at the numbers, if you look too close at the details, the whole thing just doesn't add up anymore. That it's this sort of idea that if you were to listen to people's experiences, if you were to hear what they had gone through, if you were to even just think about what your own experiences are, right? That you end up in this place where you're like, either the Bible is true and I have to deny all of my own experiences, or what I experienced is true and I have to deny Christ and deny what that said. And the truth is that that's where a lot of people are at today. Maybe not you sitting in this room right now, but probably somebody that you know. Maybe it is you. And listen, this is my fault. This is the fault of preachers who are like me, who very easily have overcomplicated something that should not have been that complicated. We've confused it. We've added things to it. We've done all of this other stuff about what faith is. And so when we read a story like Abraham, right? And we hear the word faith attached to it, we go, tapping out. You're done. I don't want anything to do with anything that looks like that. Jesus didn't tell anybody to ignore their experiences. In fact, what he said was, he said, I'm going to give you all of those things. Lean into all of it because I will be proven out in it. Bring it all to me. That's what Jesus said. Because he says that faith is not some sort of mind-numbing or experience-denying thing. So what is faith then? If it's not that, what is it? Well, let me just start with what it's not. Let me just start with something that faith is not. Faith is not some sort of force or power. Right? Faith is not some sort of lasso that we take and we put around God, and if we just have enough faith, if we have enough people who have faith, if we have enough people who can pray the right thing, who can say the right things, who can do the right things, then it will force God to do what we want him to do. That's not faith. Some of you, though, you grew up in a church where that's what faith sounded like. That you just needed to get a bunch of people who had enough faith. Maybe you had somebody even close to you who was sick. And you were praying for God to heal them. You're like, God, I really want you to heal him. And then nothing happened. You're like, well, I must not have enough faith, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring somebody else with me. And so you go and you invite somebody else to come alongside of you and to pray with you. And together you both begin to pray, and you begin to grow an ever-growing circle of people praying. Before long, the whole church is praying, and then eventually somebody comes, maybe the pastor, maybe somebody else, they put some special oil on the person, and you're like, now, God is he's gonna do this, and we have faith that's gonna happen. Some strong prayers, some strong words, strong things, loud things start getting said. Experience that. Afterwards, you're like, God, are you real? Are you there? Because I'm not sure anymore. But listen, faith is not some sort of a power or a force to be controlled or tapped into. Andy Stanley says this. He says, listen, a force or a power that you can tap into and control is called magic, not faith. And faith is not magic, and magic is not faith. Now, I'm not telling you that you should go out and use magic. I am telling you that faith is not some sort of a force or some sort of power. Here's the second thing that faith is not. Faith is not some sort of magic formula, right? It's not some sort of, hey, if you figure all of these out, if you do things in this right order, some combination lock that if you set 777 on there, all of a sudden, tink, it all opens up for you. That's not faith. You may have heard it even said this way: if you'll send your money in, that's not faith. Faith is not a formula. So if that's not what faith is, which, let's be honest, we know that's not what faith is. Right? When we see that sort of thing, even though it makes us question, right? When we hear somebody who leans in and describes faith in those kind of ways, there's something in us that kind of goes, oh. So what is faith? Well, the author in Hebrews helps us out. He gives a definition of faith. He says, now faith is, which anytime the Bible says a word and is, you just put a giant equal sign there, right? Faith equals something. So here's what he says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. He says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. All right, time out. There's a trap word in that sentence, right? Hope. What in the world does hope mean? If that's what I have an assurance of, is that thing that is hoped for, what in the world is hope? We understand this word. We use it all the time. We hope for all kinds of things. We hope to get a raise. I don't hear any amens on that one. There you go. Yeah. Here we go. Mamas, we hope to get sleep. Yeah. We hope for our football team to win today. I'm not going to give you the side of that one, right? I know where you sit at, Parker. If you're on this side of the room, you may be a 49ers fan. I'm just saying. There are probably some Kansas City fans on this side too. So, listen, faith happens when your hope so becomes an assurance that something will be so. All right? Let me say that again. Faith happens when your hope so becomes an assurance that something will be so. So we understand what hope means, right? Hope means wanting something to be with no guarantee. When we hope for our football team to win today, we have no guarantee that that's going to happen. We just have a hope of it. We hope for a raise. We have no guarantee that that's going to happen. We just hope for it. When we hope for sleep, man, I don't know. There may be some guarantees on that. It's called NyQuil. But just kidding. We would never use it for that sort of purpose in our house. Amen. So hope means wanting something to be with no guarantee, and faith happens when your hope so becomes an assurance that something will be so. Now we're not talking like some sort of a sure bet sort of a thing, right? You've heard about those sort of things, a sure bet, right? If you bet here, then that will definitely come. We've seen that trap. We know what that looks like, right? But the author of Hebrews, the writer here, is saying that what makes us confident or assured of a hope that will be so. Well, that's the question, right? What makes us confident or assured that our hope so will become a be so? Because that's faith. And to be honest, the writer of Hebrews doesn't answer the question. He's like, well, faith is the assurance of things hoped for. But he doesn't go on to tell you about, like, how we get there. And the reason he doesn't answer it is because he's pretty sure that you already know the answer. You're like, wait, time out. You think I already know the answer about how to turn my hope so into a be so, or how to be confident in that? I do. Let's just see if you know the answer. When you're hoping for a raise, right? When you're hoping to get a bonus, or maybe you're hoping to get a new contract, or maybe you're hoping, Aaliyah, for a date. When you're hoping for what that is, right? You're not confident of any of that happening, but when do you move to being confident in that? The moment that your boss walks in and he says to you, hey, I know that you've been hoping for. The moment that that boy that you like texts you and says, hey, I know that you've been hoping for me to ask you out. I know what you've been hoping for, and I'm going to deliver on that. When your boss walks in and says, I know you've been hoping for a raise, and you're going to get one starting February the 2nd. Your hope so becomes a well be so because of the promise that somebody makes. And when you go home, you no longer say to your spouse, hey, I'm hoping that I'm going to get a raise on February the 2nd. You're now confident about the promise that was given to you by your boss. And so the writer of Hebrews, he says, listen, here's what moves you from a hope so to a confident will be so. He says it's the promise. The author of Hebrews goes on in that same verse about defining faith, says that it moves not only from that, but it's the conviction of things not seen. Raise has transpired, but you still have faith that it's going to happen. Because your hope so has turned into a will be so. So hold on to that for a second, that idea. I want to read to you what Paul, the guy who wrote most of the New Testament, says in the book of Romans about Abraham. It comes in chapter 4, verse 20. He says, no unbelief made him, that's Abraham, waver concerning the promise of God. But he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God. And if you're in your Bible with it, you should just underline this. Because he was fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. He was fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. That is what faith is. Right? Faith is, just to put a definition together that's not exactly what Hebrews said, but real close to it. Faith is confidence that God is and will do what he promised to do. Faith is confidence that God is and will do what he promised to do. When we do not believe that God is because of faith. When we do not believe that God will do something, it's because of faith. Because faith is confidence that God is, right? Our faith doesn't move God to do something. Our faith is just the confidence that he is doing something. That he is who he said he is. That he will do what he said he will do. That's what faith is. And Abraham did not believe that God is because of faith. He already knew who God was and who God is, and that gave him the faith. And listen, he believed all of these things because of the evidences and the experiences that led to the growth of his faith. That whole story about all of these things that had already happened in Abraham's life were all the moments of experience with God. They were all the moments where God said to do something, and he had a choice to either go, yes, God, I will believe you are who you say you are, and you will do what you said you will do, or no, God, I'm not going to believe what you are, what you said you are, and that you're going to do what you said you do. There are moments when he got it right, and there are moments when he got it wrong. And he used all of that, and God didn't beat him up over those moments where he got it wrong or those moments where he got it right. He used all of that to bring him to the point that when God asked this big, huge, tremendous step of him, that he was like, listen, God, I've looked at this. I understand that when I've done it my own way, it doesn't work out. And while I don't understand how this is going to work out, I know who you are, and I know the promise that you've given me, and I am confident that because of who you are going to do what you said you will do. Listen, Abraham didn't go to sleep one night and wake up the next day with faith. That's not how faith works. It grew step by step by step. And there was a moment where Abraham said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust that you are who you say you are and that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And he took a step in that direction. And a lifetime of steps led him to a moment that when God said, hey, your whole promise is pinned on this guy. In fact, in case you were wondering, I'm just going to skip down just a minute there, Brennick. In case you were wondering, later on in the book of Hebrews, same chapter 11, just in case we were wondering about this, by faith Abraham, when he was tested to offer up Isaac, who he had received the promise of, and was in the act of offering up his son. And this is what was said about his son, that through Isaac all of your offspring shall be named. Listen, this wasn't like some sort of, well, if I get rid of this son, then God will just give me a new son, right? Or maybe it wasn't supposed to happen through Isaac. No, God had been very, very specific about it's going to happen through Isaac. And so here it is, he's laying out his entire future, everything that he thought that it was supposed to be. God's saying, are you going to trust me for your future, or are you going to trust you for your future? I'm going to tell you one more story and then we'll go. It's actually a story that Jesus tells. It's a story about three managers, three servants really. And these three servants, each of them received a talent. And when we hear that word talent, we often equate that with like abilities. And I think that's probably okay in this, but specifically, talents was money. One received 5, one received 2, one received 1 talent. And then the master went away on a long journey. And the servant who received 5 and the servant who received 2, they began going about working and investing and using those resources that had been given to them. And before long, they had doubled the talents that had been given to them. But the one who received 1, he went off and he buried it, like buried treasure. And he continued to do life as he's always known it. One day, the master came back. And as appropriate for the master to do, he asked for the money back that he had put them in charge of. And the first 2 brought the money back, and they brought a report back about what had transpired. And then the third did the same. He went out, he dug it up, dusted it all off, and offered it back to the master. And after the report of the first 2, the master looks at the third and he's perplexed. And he doesn't really understand what has transpired and what happened. And so he asks him, he says, what happened? And the third servant replied that he knew how hard the master had worked for his money. And so he didn't want to be responsible for losing what the master had given to him. So he took it out and he buried it. And the master looked at him in just disbelief about, I can't believe what I'm hearing back from you. You knew who I was. You knew what I was about. And if you knew that, because you just told me, you should have at the very least have like put this in the bank or something so it would have grown like with some interest. Instead, you were a fool for what you had done. And he cast him away. In fact, he took the 1 talent and he gave it to the other managers, the other servants. And he kicked that servant out. To the other two servants, though, he turned to them and he said to them, he said, "Well done, good and faithful servants." Good and faithful servants. You know, in that story, I think it's pretty clear who placed limits on themselves and who had not. Two servants were able to go beyond what had been given to them, but one was not. Two of them had confidence to use what the master had given to them, and as a result, they were called faith-filled, or full of faith. But the one was not. They all knew who the master was. They all knew that he would return one day. They all knew that he was going to ask for his money back that he had entrusted them with. And those beliefs caused them to act in a certain way. And two of them took that action and the evidences and the experiences of what they had, and one of them did not. And I think it's interesting that we started with that idea of people who think that a Jesus follower is somebody who has a mind-numbing, experience-denying faith. And yet, the master who's representing Jesus here is upset with somebody who lived out a mind-numbing experience denying by burying what he'd been given. Faith caused those two servants to act. Faith caused Abraham to act. By the way, let me finish off that passage in Hebrews where it talks about the fact that Isaac was the offspring, the named offspring of Abraham. Here's how it finishes in verse 20. Abraham considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead. You know what I find fascinating about that statement? Now we would look back at it and go, well, of course God could do that. We saw him raise Jesus from the dead. We've seen other people that were raised from the dead, all in the context of that. So of course, God, do you know that at this point, nobody had ever done that? Nobody had been raised from the dead. And yet Abraham believed that God was so good and that God was who he said he was and was going to do what he said he was going to do. He's like, listen, even if I do kill Isaac, if God doesn't provide any other way out of this, God will raise him back from the dead because God said this is how it was going to happen, that my offspring, that this great nation was all going to come through Isaac. And I trust God. Even when it doesn't make sense to me. Abraham's faith had grown to the point that he considered that even though he had never seen God do it, that God would, that God could. The evidence was all in. The experience was all in. He knew who God is. He knew who God was. He knew what God's promises were. And he was living on those. So maybe you're sitting here today and you're like, faith. Faith. Here's the real question about faith. Everybody has faith in something. The question becomes what faith you have. Maybe what faith you've lost. What is it fixed to? What is it fixated on? What is it tied down to? What is it fastened to? Same writer of Hebrews, chapter 12, one chapter over. He says this. He says, you and I are surrounded by a huge cloud of witnesses. Because of that, we should put aside every weight and every sin which clings so closely, and we should run with endurance the race that is set before us. And again, if you've got yours open and want to underline, here it is. We should look to Jesus. Why? Because he is the founder and the perfecter of our faith. You see, Abraham knew the secret to a limitless faith long before the writer of Hebrews ever even wrote it down. He knew he had to fix his eyes, and he had to fix his faith on Jesus. I don't know about you. I hope for you, my desire for you, is that one day you would hear the same words that I so desperately desired to hear. That is to stand in front of my Jesus and to hear from him, well done, good, and faithful, knowing more of who you are, understanding what your promises are so I can live in them. And that grows our faith. Let's pray. You know, maybe you're here and it's the first time you've ever heard somebody who said this about faith. That faith is placing it all on who God is and about the promises that he's made. You know, the most important promise that God made was that you and I could have eternal life. We could be with him forever. The fact that he wanted that for us. And the promise continues on to say that the only way that you can get that is through saying yes to Jesus and saying that you'll follow him. Maybe you've never put your faith there. You've never taken that step to lean in and say, God, if that is who you are, and if your promise is true, then I'm going to choose to put some faith in that. I'm going to lean towards that. If that's you, don't walk out of here today if you're like, you know what? Yes, I want to say yes to that. Will you see me at the back of the room? Don't leave with a question mark about where your faith is at. But thank you for this message about a guy that had limitless faith. What an incredible moment that I only wish I could be like. God, would you help us? Would you guide us? Would you lead us? As we grow in our faith. In your name. Amen.
Amen. What a great sermon. Thank you for delivering that. I mean, I know that is, you know, as a parent, it's almost inconceivable that you could think that, right? I mean, that you can take your son, especially after 99 years. I mean, over 40 and have 2 young kids, I couldn't imagine what that would be like. But to take your son through faith and take them up to an altar and know that God was going to give you that strength to sacrifice your son and with the hope that he would bring him back to life. You know, I don't have sons. You know, this week it probably above most the term #GirlDad is really out there, and I've been blessed with 3 beautiful daughters. Coincidentally enough, 2 out of the 3, their middle names are Faith and Hope. The other one is Grace, which I was like, please, man, mention that, and then I'd have like the trifecta. But next week. But I couldn't imagine being asked to do something like that, or even fathom the concept of that kind of faith. But I'll tell you what, I've heard this story since I was a little kid, and it hasn't been until today that it was really like, wow, that's the faith that God is asking for. You know, and if you have that kind of faith, and through the hope that by giving yourself to God and to Christ, that He is going to do magical things through you, He will provide you with that grace, and you'll be blessed beyond measures. I mean, you could have a nation be built straight through you, or at least inside of you. And through that grace, that leads us to where we are right now, and where we have the opportunity to give back to God and thank Him for the things that He's given to us. You know, on your seat, you'll have a welcome card. If you're a first-time guest, do us a favor. Please put your name on there, your contact information, so that we can reach out to you. Please turn that in, because if you have been here before, you've heard this. If you haven't, for everyone that we give, for first-time guests, we give a donation on your behalf to a charity. And we were really blessed last year to give over $1,000 to those charities. So please fill that out, put that in there. Put a prayer request on the bottom. Again, we talk about that faith. You know, I know a lot of people have dealt with pain or have pain in their own lives. So please put a prayer request on there so that we can pray for you. If you have been here before, and God is moving you through your continued dedication and faith, and He's been gracious to you, start to think about giving so that we can give back on your behalf, so that it can continue to grow. I mean, you see the growth in our church. We can continue to grow and be involved in the community, so please think about that, pray about that, and see how God moves and works in your life. And there's multiple ways to give. You can give into the offering basket here. You can give online at Estrella.church, that's our website. You can also check in there too. You can do the same thing on the welcome cards that you can online or on our app, which is Church Center. If you go to that, it is just punch in the Church at Estrella, and it'll pull up, and you can sign up, and you can get your information stored on there. But makes it really easy to be able to go on there. You can now track to see what you've given throughout the year. Helps with tax information at the end, but you can kind of track and see if you're reaching those goals that you can set for yourself of how you want to participate in church and give back. So with that being said, we'll pray, take our offering, and then we'll have Courtney and Ryan close us out. Dear Lord, thank you for just an amazing sermon that Pastor Charles delivered today. It's difficult as parents to think that you could ask something like that, but Lord, through faith in you and the things that you can do in our lives, you can change us and bless us beyond anything we could have ever imagined. From the smallest little thing, Lord, to the largest ask, it's only through you that those things could ever be accomplished. So Lord, as we go out through this week, please let us turn our eyes to you and put our faith in you and trust in you to help us make the right decisions, help us make the right choices, so that we can be closer to you and more representative of what you're doing in our lives and the people around us. Lord, bless this offering.